Hey guys, welcome to BP, the Bible Perspective, the Rapture, Part 46, as we study Matthew 24 and the book of Revelation side by side. Before we continue, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. Now, we are in a deep dive study of eschatology, the study of end times, with a focus on the rapture. Now, this is a long study. As you can see, this is video number 46. So this is a deep dive. So if you really wanted to kind of follow us from the beginning, there's, again, 45 videos to date. This will be number 46. We are looking at the rapture. Now, we're going to come back to focusing on the rapture. We have done, again, plenty of videos in this 46 to date volume. We started this series with talking about the rapture. Actually, I think one of the original titles was Biblical Proofs of the Rapture. And that evolved into us studying end times. And I wanted to do this deep dive because I think typically if you only focus on certain aspects, you won't get the full picture. So I said that in order to understand the rapture, we also have to understand eschatology, the complete revelation of end times. So that's what we've been doing. Now, in this kind of phase, you could say we're studying Matthew 24 and in the book of Revelation side by side. And one of the reasons why is because I think the outlay, the format of both are similar. Where in Matthew 24, Jesus is talking about end times. And so he starts off by talking about, in his first section, what believers would go through, and then he goes into the 7-year tribulation period, and we see the same thing with the book of Revelation. He starts off with Jesus' message to the churches, and then he goes into the 7-year tribulation period, or the pouring out of wrath. Now, other aspects of prophecy too is understanding what is being said and to whom and about whom. And so I'm going to quickly say this. Let me bring up my picture. As we have dealt, again, many times, that this is a prophetic picture that was given in Daniel chapter 2, a dream that God had given Nebuchadnezzar. This is an end time dream up until the second coming of Jesus Christ. And what you have is this prophetic picture of 5 world dominating kingdoms, ending with the coming of Jesus, which is pictured here with the rock that comes and strikes this image, this human form, representing 5 major kingdoms. He strikes it at the feet, which is at the end times. And in Daniel chapter 2, it says, in the days of these kings, God will set up an everlasting kingdom. So the 5 kingdoms, and one of the good things about prophecy is we could locate ourselves in prophecy. And that's one of the wonderful things when you really study. And let me also exhort that you shouldn't study prophecy from a theological or denominational perspective, or a theologian perspective, because sometimes you will fall into people's opinion. And if you notice in all of these videos, I never quote one man. We are studying the scriptures, the plain reading of the scriptures. And I think that's been more helpful than trying to study a man opinion of the scriptures, the very scriptures we have. Now, these 5 kingdoms, as you can see, the head of gold was the Babylonian kingdom. The chest and arms of silver was the kingdom of the Medes and Persians. The belly and thighs of bronze was the ancient kingdom or the Grecian kingdom. And then the legs of iron was the Roman kingdom. Now, these 4 kingdoms have historically come and gone. As we look back from the giving of this prophecy, some 2,500 years, we can see that this prophecy has already come to pass. These 4 kingdoms, as prophesied at the time of Daniel. By the way, the Babylonian kingdom was prophesied a couple of hundred years before the invasion. And then, as we can see, during this time, the Babylonian kingdom was already going. By the time we get to Daniel chapter 9, the Babylonian kingdom has come and gone. From our perspective, these 4 kingdoms have already come and gone. So what is yet to arise is the last kingdom, the feet of iron and clay. And that kingdom doesn't have a name, but it is yet to rise. And the 10 toes represent 10 kings. We get into a lot more definition of what these kings are. I'll get the describing the book of Revelation in a moment. But the idea that the 10 toes represent 10 kings, and then also you see the Antichrist or the beast that will rule this kingdom. And as in Daniel 2 says, in the days of these kingdoms, we see that the rock, which represents the kingdom of Jesus, strikes the image at the feet and destroys the entire image. Okay. Now, where are we in Bible prophecy? So right now we are between the kingdom of the legs and iron, and then the kingdom of the feet of iron and clay. Prophetically, that's where we are right now. We've also studied, and I'm going to quickly go to Matthew 24, where we are between, as Daniel's 70 weeks, which is told in Daniel chapter 9. Prophetically, we are between week 69 and week 70. So the 70th week corresponds with the feet of iron and clay. All right. Now, again, like I said, there's a whole lot to unpack with that. So again, I'm not going to spend the time because you can go back. Like I said, you can look at where we build our case, 45 plus videos. Okay. Now, as I said, I wanted to do a more in-depth study, so I said let's go to prophecies such as in Joel and Amos, in Zechariah chapter 14, and then what we're doing is we're studying the prophecies, and then let's locate if the church is there in Matthew 24 and the book of Revelation, or where is the church. So in Matthew 24, you see Jesus laying out prophecy, the end times, but he doesn't mention the church. Okay. But then when we get to the book of Revelations, and this is why I wanted to study the book of Revelations, because Matthew 24 is Jesus, in a sense, it's in his public ministries, his last words, one to Israel. And remember in chapter 23, he says, you won't see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That has not yet come to pass. We also see that in fact, let's just go there. Let's pick it up in Matthew 24 before we go to Revelation. So in Matthew 24, here's what I said too in Matthew 23, verse 37 says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, she who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together, the hen gathers her chicks under her wings, yet you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. If I tell you, you will never see me again until you say, he who comes in the name of the Lord is the blessed one. So this is Jesus' last words as he is speaking to in his public ministry to the nation of Israel. This, like I said, they haven't seen Jesus since that time. So then he comes over in chapter 24 when he says, don't you see all these things? I assure you, not one stone will be left here upon another that will not be thrown down. This came to pass in AD 70. The Roman general Titus came in and leveled the city as well as the temple. Now they ask the question in verse 3, when he says, tell us when these things will happen, what is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? So he's answering these three questions in this chapter. When we get down to verse number 14, he says this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations. So this is a commission, remember, to the church to go and be a witness, right? This good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So now, when we just kind of go forward by just a couple of months, we see as Jesus is ascending into heaven in Acts chapter 1, we see where this question and this issue comes up again. They ask Jesus, will you restore the kingdom to Israel at this time? In fact, let me just do that here. All right, let me do that. I want, for continuity's sake, I want to always, keep this in mind here, because I think one of the things we have been indoctrinated so that it is hard for us, especially if you have been taught a certain theological way of thinking. But let's look at the scriptures themselves. And let me say this. I also pay attention to details. So what I do is I say, okay, when we talk about the details, so for example, the second coming of Jesus, the detail is very clear. If you tell me that Jesus came back in the spirit, as post-millennialists say, if he came back, that's a false gospel, because Jesus clearly said that every eye will see him, and and all the people of the earth will mourn. Post-millennialists say that Jesus will come back to a welcoming world after the church fulfills the Great Commission of winning most of the world, if not all of the world. That's not in the gospel. Nowhere do you see this. It's just amazing. Okay. But they have to ignore a whole lot of scriptures in order to arrive at that. But I do digress. So now, as he is, again, getting ready to ascend into heaven, so this is his last words in terms of on the earth, as well as the physical to the earth in the physical world. Now, Revelations is just that. It is a revelation. We'll get to that in a moment. The book of Revelation, but this is as Jesus is here, the resurrected Christ, speaking to an open crowd. So verse 6 says, so when they had come together, they asked him, Lord, are you restoring the kingdom to Israel at this time? Right? Now, why are they asking that? All of the prophecies we've been studying, Daniel's 70 weeks, if you remember, I'm going to refer to it again. That image that I just showed you was a part of Daniel's prophecy. One of the prophecies was his 70 weeks. And then he says these, so all of the prophecies, when we talk about God restoring Israel, not only the devastation that's going to come to Israel, but God restoring Israel. So this is why they're asking the question, are you restoring the kingdom to Israel at this time? Now notice what he says here, verse 7. He said to them, it is not for you to know the times or the periods that the Father has set by his own authority. So in other words, it's not for you to know that time. So there is a time and period. just you don't worry about that now. But, so in other words, don't worry about that. He doesn't deny it. He doesn't say it's not going to happen. He said just don't worry about it. In other words, don't focus on that. Here's what you focus on. But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. Now that's important. That's important because the ends of the earth goes beyond, notice he said it goes beyond just Judah and Samaria. So in other words, the witnesses. So here's the question. We stopped here, and again, we're going to come back to this later on. We're going to come back to this. However, let's ask the question, and we did teach on this. What is Jesus accomplishing by us being a witness in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the end of the earth? Now remember, he's speaking to his disciples. This great commission, go into all the world and make disciples. What is the result of that? And we said the result of that was that during this period of time, Jesus, God, is building his house, his sanctuary, the church, his body. We're going to come back to that. We have studied that. But we're going to come back to that because between week 69 and week 70, between that period of time, that's what God is doing. And one of the reasons why you don't see that in the prophecy is because there's this mystery that Paul talked about in Ephesians chapter 2 and 3. Now with that, so when he says, verse 14, this good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as the testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So then he goes on and he says, verse 15, so when you see, now between verse 14 and verse 15, just, for argument's sake, I'm going to say, here we are at week 69, and then we see here the, by the way, Daniel's 70 weeks. At the 69 weeks, it brings us to this period of time. It brings us to the Messiah being cut off. So now we see between week 69 and week 70, we see this mystery unveiled in and through the Apostle Paul's ministry. So in verse 14, we see the good news that the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So then we see there's this gap. And we'll get back to this later and come back to this because the series is called The Rapture. Okay. And why? One, I believe that the church will be raptured before this period. Verse 15, the tribulation begins. So he said, so when you see the abomination that causes desolation, spoken by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. So that's why I want you to point here to see that now he's going to go back to talking about those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So this period of time here, and I think this is important, this period of time goes back to the prophecies around Jerusalem. So let me kind of go back because before we go to Revelations, I want us to understand this. So I'm going to do something. I'm doing a little different here. Zechariah chapter 14. Look at this. He says, a day of the Lord is coming. So who is he? When your plunder. So who is he talking to? Israel, right? He says, your plunder will be divided in your presence. I will gather all nations against Jerusalem for battle. The city will be captured, the houses looted, the women raped, half of the city will go into exile, but the rest of the city will not be removed from the city. So now if you look at here, when he says, when you see the abomination called the desolation, spoken by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. A man on the housetop must not come down to get things out of his house, and a man in the field must not go back to get his clothes. Woe to the women and nursing mothers in those days. Pray that your escape may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath, for at that time there will be great tribulation, the kind that hasn't taken place from the beginning of the world until now and never will again. Unless those days were limited, no one would survive, but those days would be limited because of the elect. Now, then you see the coming of Jesus. Look at verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be dark and the moon will shed its light. Now, we haven't gotten there yet in the book of Revelation, but notice, immediately after the tribulation. We'll come back to that. So notice again what he's talking to here, this tribulation that's going to be involving Israel. So then we go back to, this is Zechariah, then the Lord will go out. Verse 3 again. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as he fought in the day of battle. And on that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem in the east. The Mount of Olives will be split in half from the east, from the west, forming a huge valley, so that half of the mountain will be moved to the north and half to the south. You will flee by my mountain valley, for the valley of the mountains will extend to Exhale, and you will flee from the earthquake. You will flee, you will flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah the king. The Lord my God will come, and all of his holy ones with him. So we know this hasn't come. We're going to come back to this because when we get to Revelation chapter 19. But notice again, where is this battle taking place? What is the prophecy here around? Israel. So, and let me do one more before I go to Revelations, Daniel chapter 9. Daniel chapter 9. Again, we have studied this in great detail. So if I'm going fast, it's because we have studied this in great detail. So you can go back to the videos and you can, just again, even from the beginning, follow this study. So remember, he says, so when you see the abomination that causes desolation, spoken by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place. So this is, I want you to see this prophecy here. One was the 70 weeks. He says, so 70 weeks are decreed about your people in your holy city to bring rebellion to an end, to put a stop to sin, to wipe away iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to set up the vision and the prophecy, and then and to anoint the most holy place. Again, so what is this prophecy about? The 70 weeks, which is the 70 almost a 490 year prophetic timetable. No one understands this from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, or 69 weeks. It will be rebuilt with a plaza and a moat, but in difficult times. Now, the idea here is this 69-week prophecy began. We read this in Ezra chapter 1, after the Babylonian exile, after the 70-year exile concluded. King Cyrus of Persia issued the decree for Nehemiah and Ezra and the other Israel leaders to go back and restore Jerusalem, rebuild the temple. But that also began this 70-week prophetic countdown. So 69 weeks brings us to the Messiah, right? So 69 weeks brings us to the Messiah. Verse 26, after those 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and we have nothing, okay? So at this point, this ends, there is a shift now, okay? So as I often say, verse 27 should have began here with the people. We notice what he says, the people of the coming prince will destroy the city in the sanctuary. The end will come with the flood, and until the end there will be war. Desolations are decreed. He will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put a stop to the sacrifice and offerings, and the abomination of desolation will be on the ring of the temple until the decreed destruction is poured out on the desolator. So right here, remember Jesus said, Daniel prophesied this. But this is not the only time Daniel prophesied this. Let's go back and in chapter 8, where is it here? Okay. In Daniel chapter 8, he talks about the abomination that makes desolate as well. Here we go. So this is, okay, so verse 9, this is chapter 8, verse 9, says, From one of them a little horn emerged and grew extensively towards the south and the east, and towards the beautiful land, that beautiful land that referred to Israel. It grew as high as the heavenly host and made some of the stars and some of the hosts fall to earth. Now, if you've been following our study in Revelation, you see the same kind of imagery given in Revelation chapter 12. He says, and then it said, it trampled them. It says, verse 11, it made itself great, even up to the Prince of Hosts. It removed the daily sacrifice and overthrew the place of his sanctuary. Because of the rebellion, a host together with the daily sacrifice would be given over. The horn would throw truth to the ground and would be successful in whatever it does. Now, if you remember, we just concluded in the last study Revelation chapter 13, which is the beast. And one of the things we saw about this beast was that Satan will give him his power. He will be arrogant beyond belief. And notice he says here, he will go into the temple of God and demand to be worshipped as God. He will take away the daily sacrifice, and then he will begin a holocaust against the Jewish people. And I'll read this. He says, Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the speaker, How long will the events of this vision last? The daily sacrifice, the rebellion that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and of the host to be trampled. He said to me, For 23 evenings and mornings, and the sanctuary will be restored. Now, this 2300 is roughly about 3.5 years, right? And so, yes, if my math is right, so anyway, let me see here. Now I am sort of 2300 evenings divided by 365. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. This is about 7 years. Okay, about 7 years. I think the number comes down to around 6.3 years, something like that. So again, doing this 7-year period. Okay, and then we see the other word, Daniel, where he breaks his covenant during the middle of this. But again, so notice, what we're studying in the Revelations chapter 13 is not something. It's well prophesied. Okay. It is very much so prophesied. So, all right. So, in our last study, we studied the rise of the beast. We know that in Paul's revelation, he would come by the working of Satan. We see here that Satan gave them his power. And you will note that the dragon, look at verse 2, then the beast I saw was like a leopard, his feet were like a bear, and his mouth was like a lion. The dragon gave him his power and throne and great authority. Now, you also note verse 1, and I saw the beast coming up out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads on his horns and diadem. So the 10 horns, if you go back to the image that I showed you at the beginning, was the 10 feet, the 10 toes. All right. So up until this point, from chapters 11 to here 13 were parenthetical chapters. So now we're going to get back to the 7-year, or you can say the Great Tribulation period itself. Now you remember this period had to be started in chapter 6, that God began to pour out his judgment. God poured out his judgment, began to pour out his judgment. First, there were 7 seal judgments, and then that 7th seal overlapped into the 7 trumpet judgments, and then the 7th trumpet judgment will overlap into 7 bowl judgment, and then each set of judgments, each one were more severe than the other. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, also, these are not just natural occurrences, because these are specifically God pouring out these judgments on the earth. Okay, so in Revelation chapter 14, verse 1, he says, "Then I looked, and there on Mount Zion stood a lamb, and with them were 144,000 who had a name on his father, who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads." Now, the 144,000, in case you forgot, let's scroll back to chapter 7. And here we see the 144,000 right here. Verse 2 said, "I saw another angel who had the seal of the living God rise up from the east. He cried out in a loud voice to the 4 angels who were empowered to harm the earth and the sea. Don't harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the slaves of our God on their foreheads." And I heard the number of those that were sealed, and then it was 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the Israelites. So during this period of time, this is what you're going to see: 12,000 from each of the tribes. Okay. Now, there are people who think that they're going to be great evangelists. Okay, and the reason why they think that, there's some, right, is because after this it says, after this I looked, and there was a vast multitude from every nation, tribe, people, language, which no one could number, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. Now, people think that this great multitude are the result of the evangelistic effort of the 144,000. The only thing I want to say is the script, it may be, right? I'm just saying the scriptures themselves doesn't say that. That's all. It just, we see the 144,000, and then we see this great, vast nation. It doesn't say anything about them going out, winning people. So sorry, I know if you watch some of the older tribulation movies, you see the 144,000 kind of going through the earth, preaching, but that no. All right. So back to 14, chapter 14. He said, "Then I looked, and there on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him were 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. I heard a sound from heaven, like the sound of a cascading waters, like the rumbling of a loud thunder. The sound I heard, excuse me, was also like harpists playing on their harps. They sung a new song before the throne and before the 4 living creatures and the elders. But no one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. These are the ones not defiled with women, for they have kept their virginity. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes, and they were redeemed from the human race as the first fruits for God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouth. They are blameless. Now, these Jewish men, notice they are men, virgins, right, who kept themselves. These men, and everything should be too kind of limited to what's going on during this great tribulation period. Okay, so when he says that they are the first fruits of God during this tribulation period, that God gathers them, that God seals them, and so Jehovah Witnesses, Jehovah Witnesses claim when they started uh, their religion in the late 1800s. Okay, and as with all cults, that it is founded upon the opinion and views of one man, and in this case, Charles Rufford. And then people believe that his revelation then is true. So then, and the thing about with Jehovah Witnesses, no matter what you say, they in their minds they totally disregard what their eyes see. So if you say that in their case, he taught that the 144,000 would be the 144 faithful Jehovah Witness. That's how it first started off, like the 144,000 faithful. And of course, because it grew and it kind of exceeded the 144,000, what do you do with the rest of those 144,000? Well, they then created an earthly class of people. And so the faithful earthly class, then you get to live on the earth in that kind of new paradise. Not a bad deal. It's just not biblical, right? Not a bad deal. It's not biblical. So what do you do with the 144,000? They're the chosen one. Now I can tell you, I have personally met one of the 144,000. Now, of course, I say that in jest. I met a person who claimed to be one of the 144,000. A number of years ago, I used to have a Bible study with one of the elders, and we'd go back and forth on scripture. And he told me, God revealed to me that I was one of the 144,000. Okay. And of course, they also add a lot of other stuff to this 144,000. And that is one that sometimes when part of the 144,000 who over time maybe apostatized, then God had to fill in some of the other 144,000. This is what you call moving the goalposts, first of all. Because if you notice right here, nothing about this says that this number would fluctuate. It would have to be, replenished. And notice, nothing about this says that any of the 144,000 whom God has selected, whom God sealed, then would change. But enough on the 140 on the Jehovah's Witness, because again, they are like a lot of other cults, like Mormonism and all that. You could tell Hebrew Israelites, okay, all of them. The commonality is they solely believe what one man says. And so when you ask a Jehovah's Witness, well, if the 144,000 are 12,000 from each tribe, and I did ask him, I said, well, what tribe are you from if you wanted 144,000? Of course, he could not answer. So, so this here we see the 144,000 that they're chosen. God uses the term first fruits. Now, first fruits were, if you were a farmer, picture this, if you were a farmer, let's say you had acres and acres of whatever it is you were harvesting. So the first fruits would be at the harvest time, the harvesters under the leadership of the owner would go out and get the best of these fruits. That's why they call them the first fruits they would pick. So let's say, if you had, 10,000 bushels to harvest, and let's say you get 100 bushels, and these were the best of the crop. You would bring them to the owner. Now, let's say they're apples. Let's say you got a big apple tree. So then with that, you could take and do whatever you want with that apples. Eat them, give them to the kid, bob for apples, make candy apples, or whatever. That's what the whole purpose of the first fruit. They bring them to there, and then the rest they would harvest and sell. That's kind of the idea. So the first fruit, then God said he picked it, 144,000 during this period of time. God is picking this 144,000. Doesn't mean that he's not picking any other Jewish people, but these are people who are satisfied, set aside, or sanctified for God, for his purpose, these 144,000. That's why it says, these are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes, and they were redeemed from the human race as first fruits for God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouth, and they are blameless. Now, kind of interesting statement here. They were redeemed from the human race as first fruits of God. That's kind of an interesting statement that he doesn't go into. But could this 144,000 be another 144,000? I'm posing the question because of the phrase redeemed from the human race. Now we know as we just read in chapter 7, they are 12. The 144,000 there is 12. 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes. Okay, but it's just an interesting thought from the language here. All right, verse 6. He said, "Then I saw another angel flying high overhead, having the eternal gospel to announce to the inhabitants of the earth." Now notice this: to every nation, tribe, language, and people. Now this is interesting here. And I'm going to come back to this statement because notice here, notice one of the first times in scripture that we see an angel announcing the gospel. Now I say that because in my study, when we talk about the rapture, I always look at details, and I often say, is the church, his body, on earth during this period of time? And as you can see, since chapter 4, we have not seen or heard mention of the church, Jesus' body. Okay? But we also see that this period of time is the most wicked and evil time ever, that produces the beast, the Antichrist, the world worshiping the dragon who gives the beast his power, the false prophet who makes a image and then tells people to worship the image of the beast. So now, when we see this kind of display of supernatural power from God in this most evil time, he said, "Then I saw another angel flying overhead, having the eternal gospel to announce to the inhabitants of the earth." And then he says, "to every nation, tribe, language, and people." Now, if you remember in chapter 13, let's go back for a moment. In chapter 13, where do I want to find? Here we go. This is chapter 13. It says, verse 5, "And the mouth was given to him to speak boasts and blasphemies. He was also given authority to act 42 months. He began to speak blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his dwelling, those who dwell in heaven. He was permitted to wage war against his saints and to conquer them. He was also given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All those who live on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name was not written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slaughtered." So now when we come down to here, this angel flying, he says, "Then I saw another angel flying overhead, right? Having the eternal gospel to announce to the inhabitants of the earth, and to every nation and tribe, language, and people. He spoke with a loud voice. All right. I'm going to go back. I just want you to see. Notice that. So this crowd here is one that is the most wicked and evilest generation in a crowd to date in human history. That they have worshipped the beast, the false prophet, and the dragon, who also gives him his authority. They worship him. So this is who this angel is flying overhead now, right? So they're going to hear this, but they're going to, of course, reject this gospel. Verse 7, he spoke with a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship the maker of heaven and earth, the seas and springs of water. So this is what he announced. So it seemed to me that this will be heard, this angel flying over, and people will hear it. But remember, these are the same people who have willfully chosen to worship the beast and then worship the dragon or Satan, who gives the beast his power. Verse 8, a second angel followed, saying, it has fallen, Babylon the Great has fallen, who made all nations drink of the wine of her sexual immorality, which brings wrath. Now we will get to Babylon the Great in chapters 17 and 18. A third angel followed them and spoke with a loud voice. If anyone worships the beast and his image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he will, excuse me, he will also drink the wine of God's wrath, which is mixed full strength in the cup of his anger. And he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the sight of the holy angels and in the sight of the Lamb. And the smoke of the torment will go up forever and ever. There is no rest day or night for those who worship the beast and his image, or anyone who receives the mark of his name. This demands the perseverance of the saints who keep God's commandments and their faith in Jesus. Now, this is one of the most pronounced judgments or eternal judgments. But let us not forget why this eternal judgment will occur. Notice this. It's not just God just being a meanie, but notice this, the people who what? If anyone worships the beast. Now, of course, this statement is set as a context during the tribulation period. Okay? You can also say anyone who rejects the gospel will have the same result, the same end. So this here, we should confine it to this period of time, because what is going on during this period of time is, again, the most wicked of generations to come. So if anyone worships the beast or his image and receives the mark on his forehead, on his hand, he will also drink of the wine of God's wrath, which is mixed in full strength in the cup of his anger. Now notice this, he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the sight of the holy angels and in the sight of the Lamb, and the smoke of the torment will go up forever and ever. There is no rest day or night for those who worship the beast or his image, or anyone who receives the mark of his name. And so this is so horrifying. We don't like to think about it. We do not want to even just kind of, think like, wow, right? This, I think about if I had died when I was 17, and I'm gonna, because at 17 I was at the height of my sinful rebellion, even sometimes taunting God. That, and I did it in ignorance, okay. But what was sure, I did not want anything to do with God because I wanted the world. I wanted sin, at least what I thought would be the pleasures of sin. God in His mercy saved me a year later. But I think about if I had died when I was 17, which would have been around 1977, okay, 7-ish, like that. So if I'd have died, I would be in hell right now. And so that is so terrifying, that is so frightening that my mind only can think about that so far. You know, it's like when they say if you're dreaming and you fall off a cliff, you wake up before you hit the ground. Okay? And that's the way this is, because this is a horrifying thought. Now, a lot of people find this horrifying, and they should find this horrifying. Some people would even want to reject God or criticize God because of the heavy-handed of this. But what they forget is, notice this, he starts off by telling them to fear God. The angel announces overhead during this most wicked time. The angel tells them to fear God. So the thing is, the question is, when these people face this wrath of God, why did you reject God? So you have to keep that in mind equally before you want to criticize God. He says this, verse 12 says, this demands the perseverance of the saints and who keep God's commands and their faith in Jesus. Now, also during this time, they were people who have faith in Jesus will be martyred. He says, then I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Write, the dead who die in the Lord from now on are blessed." So during this period of time, actually the last 3.5 years are the most severe, when the Antichrist will begin to go on his wicked rampage against Jerusalem, against those who hold faith in Jesus. He says, "Yes," says the Spirit, "let them rest from their labors, for their works follow them." Then he says, then I looked, and there was a white cloud, and one like the Son of Man was seated on the cloud, with a gold crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Another angel came out of the sanctuary, crying in a loud voice to the one who was seated on the cloud, "Use your sickle and reap, for the time to reap has come, since the harvest of the earth is ripe." Now, this is not a good harvest, as we will see. This is not a good harvest. Verse 16, so the one seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Then another angel who had the sharp sickle came out of the sanctuary in heaven. Yet another angel who had authority over fire came from the altar, and he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, "Use your sharp sickle to gather the cluster of grapes from the earth vineyard, because its grapes have ripened." So the angel swung his sickle toward the earth and gathered the grapes from the earth's vineyard, and he threw them into the great wine press of God's wrath. Then the press was trampled outside the city, and blood flowed out of the press up to the horse's bridle for about 180 miles. Now, this is kind of an amazing statement, of course, when you think about this, that this number here, right? This number, which is the horse's bridle. So if you think about a horse's bridle, which will be anywhere from 4 to 5 feet, and then he says for 180 miles. When you think about how much blood in the body, and then you think about how many people would die. Now, remember, we had was keeping some kind of track of the death of people. We go from almost what, a three, what is the Earth? I mean, what is the Earth population? I said about 8 billion people, I believe it is. Today, if you go by today's population, at 8 billion people, at 8 billion, then during this period of time, we are already down to some 2 billion people. So already from the outpouring of God's wrath, 6 billion people will be wiped out. So when you think about that many people, yeah, that kind of blood can flow. Okay, but notice it is a result, of course, of God's judgment here. When you see the pressing and the drink and the blood, right? The cup of wrath. Okay, so um, and I say this because, as I said, during this period of time, and again, all of this video here, I'm making my case too as to why I believe that the rapture of the church, we're gone from this, his body. Now again, I'm going to swing back around and then concentrate with these verses once we're done. But a lot of people in their argument to say that the church, his body, will go through this. And I'll say this, when we talk about then the saints who are dying during this period of time are products of the time. So that's what I'm saying. They're products of the time. And what I'm going to say is, why does the church need to go through that during this period of time when Jesus is there? We'll come back around to that because we've dealt with this many times in the videos, but we'll come back to that. But all right, guys, look, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to VP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I will see you in part 47. All right.